The Salem Witch Trials, Fear, Crime, and Shadows in 1692. Salem in 1692 was a town full of secrets. It was here that one girl's cough led to the hangings of 20 innocent people, and when their bodies were cut down from the gallows, it only got worse. In 1692, life was hard for everyone, but especially for women. If you were a woman in Salem village, things were especially bad. Not only were there strict rules about how you had to behave, what you could say, and who you could see, but you were also judged incredibly harshly. For example, if someone accused you of being a witch, then your life would be over. There was no trial, no chance to defend yourself. As soon as you were accused, you were assumed to be guilty. Life was hard enough without the threat of accusation hanging over your head, but this was precisely the situation facing one young woman, Tituba. Her husband was away at sea, so she lived alone with her 2 daughters in a small house. She did all she could to get by, cooking meals, cleaning, and telling fortunes to earn extra money. One night, Abigail Williams, a 17-year-old girl from a wealthy family, came to her house to have her fortune told. But before Tituba could even begin, Abigail started screaming. She fell to the floor, writhing around in pain, as if she was in agony. When Tituba's daughter tried to help her up, Abigail slapped her across the face. Then she started accusing Tituba of attacking her with a dagger and drawing blood. Abigail's mother, a strict Puritan woman named Rebecca Nurse, immediately called for help. Soon, a crowd of people gathered outside the house. They broke down the door and arrested Tituba, then dragged her through the streets to the nearest jail. The next morning, Tituba was brought before the local magistrates to hear the charges against her. She didn't understand what they were saying because they were speaking in English, a language she didn't know. They did not allow her to bring a lawyer or an interpreter, nor did they allow her to call any witnesses or cross-examine those who were accusing her. After hearing the charges against her, she pleaded not guilty. However, as soon as she said this, more girls came forward and made similar accusations against her. The judge didn't believe that Tituba could defend herself, so he appointed John Willard as her lawyer. He was a well-respected man who tried his best to defend her, but he couldn't understand why the girls were making these accusations, and unfortunately, nobody else did either. The girls would often contradict themselves, change their story, and claim that Tituba attacked them in different ways every time. This meant that there was no way he could successfully defend her, and so he decided to play along. He pretended to believe the accusations and begged Tituba to confess. He figured that if she did, then maybe the judge would go easy on her. Tituba agreed and confessed to everything they wanted her to say. In exchange, they promised her freedom and even offered her a deal where she could avoid execution if she confessed to putting a curse on Abigail Williams. She agreed and signed the confession. However, when she appeared in court, she refused to speak. When asked why she wasn't going along with her confession, she said she'd rather die than confess to something she didn't do. This outraged the judge, and he sentenced her to death by hanging. Along with Tituba, he sentenced Sarah Good, a beggar, and Sarah Osborne, an elderly woman who'd recently lost her husband, also to death. On June 10, 1692, the 3 women were taken to Gallows Hill where they were hanged. It was here where a new horror began. Sarah Good screamed for mercy while they put the noose around her neck. Then, when she died, her body wouldn't stop moving. These weren't convulsions, but twitching. Her jaw dropped open and stayed that way until she was cut down from the gallows hours later. Then the same thing happened to Sarah Osborne, and finally, when Tituba died, her body kept twitching as well. People in the crowd were horrified to see this, and some began shouting, "Look, they're dancing in hell." This was the beginning of the Salem Witch Trials, and it would soon become a nightmare for many more people. Over the next few months, the number of accusations grew exponentially. Hundreds of people were accused, and many more would be killed. The problem was that there was no real evidence to prove anyone was actually a witch. The only proof that the prosecution had was spectral evidence, which was basically just testimony that involved dreams, visions, and apparitions. The judges accepted this as real evidence and convicted many people based on it alone. To make matters worse, when someone was accused, they had no right to a fair trial. That is because the trials took place in a special court known as the Court of Oyer and Terminer. It was set up specifically to deal with cases involving witchcraft, and it allowed the judges to bypass normal legal procedures. This meant that people could be convicted without any physical evidence, and it didn't take long for more hangings to occur. On September 22, 1692, Bridget Bishop, Rebecca Nurse, Susanna Martin, Elizabeth Howe, and Sarah Wilds were all hanged on Gallows Hill. Bishop was a tavern owner who liked to argue with people. Her neighbors accused her of using magic to harm them. Nurse was one of the most respected women in Salem, but her good reputation couldn't protect her. Her accusers claimed that she tormented them by sitting on their chests and choking them while they slept. The other 3 women were also convicted based on spectral evidence, and like the previous victims, their bodies continued to move after they were dead. By the end of October 14th, people had been executed in Salem. Then a new horror unfolded on October 29th. Giles Corey was an elderly man who had worked hard his whole life. But now his son and his daughter-in-law had accused him of being a witch and harming their children. He denied the charges, but when they pressed him to confess, he refused. He was taken to court and sentenced to death by pressing. This was a horrible way to die. They put him between 2 boards and slowly crushed him to death with heavy stones. He resisted for hours, but eventually his chest collapsed and he died. His body was left under the stones as a warning to others. This is when things started to unravel. People began to realize that there was no real evidence to support any of the accusations. Many of the confessions that the prosecution had relied on turned out to be false. Most of the accused were innocent, and it was only a matter of time before the public realized this. On October, Governor Phipps dissolved the Court of Oyer and Terminer and replaced it with a new court that followed normal legal procedures. Many of the prisoners were released, but by that point their reputations were destroyed. Their families and friends had shunned them, and most of them died soon after being freed. It was only a few months later that the governor pardoned everyone who was still in prison, but he refused to admit that the trials had been a mistake. Instead, he claimed that a great evil had been done in Salem, but that God had stopped the madness at the last minute. While this was true, it did little to ease the pain of those whose lives had been ruined, and it didn't take long for another horror to strike. On February 2, 1697, George Burroughs, John Willard, Martha Carrier, John Proctor, and Mary Easty were hanged in Boston for being witches. This was the last mass execution in Massachusetts, but it only proved how far the state would go to uphold its laws. After this, more evidence came to light that proved these people were innocent. Despite this, the government refused to pardon them. Instead, they left their families with no choice but to wait 14 years until King William of England pardoned them. But even this did little to fix the damage that had been done. Years later, descendants of the accused were still bitter about what had happened to their families. The Salem Witch Trials are a dark chapter in American history, but they serve as a reminder of what can happen when fear and superstition are given too much power. To this day, more than 300 years later, people are still uncovering new information about what really happened in Salem, and they continue to uncover new artifacts from the era, including diaries, personal items, and even voodoo dolls. Who knows what secrets the future will reveal about this terrifying event? But one thing is certain: we should never forget the lessons of Salem. And now it's time to hear from you. What's the scariest part of the Salem Witch Trials? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. We'll see you next time.